Donald Trump went to the microphones this week and told the world something that no sitting American president has said in a generation. Word for word, he said, "I don't have the yips with respect to boots on the ground." He then told the New York Post that while other presidents have always ruled out ground troops, he says, quote, "probably don't need them, but if they were necessary." And within hours of those words spreading across every wire service on earth, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi sat down with NBC News' Tom Lamas on live American television and said the exact opposite. Word for word, "we are waiting for them." Read that back. The Iranian foreign minister of a country currently being bombed by the United States military, a country that has lost its supreme leader, its navy, its air force, and significant portions of its missile arsenal, looked into an American camera and said, "We are waiting for them." That is not the language of a side that is losing. That is the language of a side that believes it has a trap ready. And I want to break this down properly because underneath that exchange, underneath the press conferences and the Pentagon posts and the war updates, there is a much darker strategic reality developing that almost no one in mainstream media is covering. And it centers on a single question that this war now cannot escape. Will American boots touch Iranian soil? Here is where we are right now. Today, March 11th, 2026. Operation Epic Fury is in its 11th day. The U.S. military has conducted over 1,700 sorties in the first 48 hours alone and has now struck more than 5,000 Iranian sites, according to the Pentagon's own figures. 7 American service members are dead. 140 have been wounded. Iran has lost its supreme leader. It has a new one, a man elevated not through clerical tradition, but through the barrel of a gun held by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, not metaphorically, not partially. Operationally closed to international tanker traffic, choking off 20% of the world's daily oil supply through a channel 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. CNN published a piece this week with one of the starkest headlines in modern financial history. This is the biggest oil disruption in history. And at the center of all of this, at the absolute apex of this crisis, is a question that Washington is refusing to answer clearly, a question that Tehran is daring Washington to answer, a question that, if answered the wrong way, could turn an 11-day air campaign into something America has not attempted since 2003. Will American boots touch Iranian soil? Let me be precise about what we know and what we do not know, because precision matters more than narrative in a situation this consequential. What we know, according to 2 current U.S. officials, 1 former U.S. official, and a 4th person with knowledge of the private discussions, all cited by NBC News, President Trump has privately expressed serious interest in deploying U.S. ground troops inside Iran. These are not fringe sources. These are officials with direct knowledge of conversations the president has been having with aides and Republican allies outside the White House. What we know, those private discussions have centered not on a large-scale ground invasion, but on a small contingent of U.S. troops deployed for specific strategic purposes, specifically to locate, secure, and prevent the dispersal of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile from its heavily fortified underground facilities. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked directly by lawmakers what happens to that uranium. His answer was 4 words: people are going to have to go and get it. He did not specify who those people would be. What we know, as of this morning, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed to international tanker traffic. Iran's IRGC issued a statement today stating directly that not a liter of oil will pass through the strait, and oil prices continue their vertical climb toward the levels that Wall Street strategists have warned could reach $200 a barrel if the closure holds. What we do not know, the true medical condition of Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's newly installed supreme leader, who, according to reporting from The Guardian, The New York Times, and Israeli officials, was wounded in the same airstrike that killed his father. The Iranian regime has not confirmed this. It has not denied it. It has said nothing. What we do not know, whether the President of the United States has already issued a private directive or is days away from issuing one that would send American soldiers onto Iranian territory for the first time in modern history, To understand why we have arrived at the brink of an American ground incursion into Iran, you need to understand the road that led here, because this war did not start 11 days ago. It started architecturally over a year ago. On February 4th, 2025, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu walked into the White House for the first meeting of Trump's second term. What he brought with him was not just diplomacy, he brought intelligence, specifically evidence that Iran had plotted to assassinate Donald Trump during the 2024 presidential campaign and an updated assessment of Iran's accelerating nuclear expansion. He planted a seed, but the path to open war required two more triggers. The first was an intelligence assessment delivered to the White House in early 2026, indicating that Iran was actively preparing preemptive ballistic missile strikes against American forces stationed across the region. Not a theoretical threat, an active preparation. The second trigger was Israel's own march toward confrontation, which had begun independently on June 13, 2025, when Jerusalem launched a wave of strikes that broke through Iranian air defenses and disrupted supply lines deep inside Iranian territory. 12 days later, on June 22, 2025, Trump crossed his own Rubicon. He authorized Operation Midnight Hammer. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. They hit Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, the three crown jewels of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The B-2 Spirit is a low observable strategic bomber. Low observable means it is designed to penetrate the most sophisticated air defense systems on Earth. Fordo is a uranium enrichment facility buried under 90 meters of solid rock specifically to survive conventional airstrikes. The B-2 hit it anyway, with GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, bombs weighing 30,000 pounds designed for nothing else. A July 2025 Pentagon assessment concluded Iran's nuclear program had been set back approximately 2 years. 2 years. Not destroyed, set back, and Tehran knew it. From that moment forward, the path to escalation was essentially locked. Diplomatic talks continued. Trump envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner worked the back channels, but Iran would not agree to dismantling its ballistic missile program or cutting its support for regional proxies. By February 11, 2026, Netanyahu was back in Washington. The operational planning for what would become Operation Epic Fury was finalized, and on February 27, 2026, sitting at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump made the final decision, a decapitation strike. Go for the head. In the early hours of Saturday, March 1st, 2026, the start of the Iranian workweek, American long-range missiles and drones moved in concert with Israeli jets and struck hundreds of Iranian military installations simultaneously. Missile batteries, naval vessels, air defense systems, command centers, and the compound where Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was located. Ali Khamenei was killed. Also dead were a cluster of senior Iranian officials positioned as potential successors, an attempt to create a leadership vacuum that would accelerate regime collapse. It did not work. Now understand what Operation Epic Fury in its current state actually means, because the air campaign has achieved extraordinary tactical results while producing a strategic outcome that was not in the plan. The political meaning is this: the United States has destroyed the Iranian military's physical infrastructure at a scale not seen since the opening of the Gulf War. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, confirmed the U.S. has struck over 2,000 targets. Iran's missile and drone salvos, according to Hudson Institute Analysis, have declined by 70 to 85% from their first-day volume. The Iranian Navy is gone. The Iranian Air Force is gone. Radar and anti-aircraft systems have been disabled across the country. By every conventional metric, the United States is winning this air war decisively. But here is the strategic meaning, and this is where the plan begins to fracture. Trump's stated war aims are not limited to military degradation. Trump said this war ends with Iran's unconditional surrender. Trump said he wants a new Iranian leadership that he approves of, modeled explicitly on what his administration achieved in Venezuela after U.S. Special Forces captured Nicolas Maduro in January of this year. In that model, a compliant successor leader is installed, oil production is restructured to benefit the United States, and American strategic interests are embedded into the new government's foundation. To achieve that in Iran, you cannot do it from the air. You need people on the ground. Phase 1 of this operation was the destruction of Iran's conventional military capability. Phase 2 is the severing of the regime's legitimacy and the engineering of its collapse. Phase 3 is the insertion of a force, size, and composition to be determined, that secures Iran's uranium, stabilizes a successor government, and prevents the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from filling the power vacuum with something more dangerous than what existed before. Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 is contested. Phase 3 has no orders attached to it yet. That is where we are. And the symbolic meaning, the signal this entire operation sends, is perhaps the most dangerous layer of all. Iran has watched the United States destroy its army and kill its supreme leader, and Iran's response was not surrender. It was not negotiation. It was the appointment of a harder line successor, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and a foreign minister going on American television to say, "We are waiting for you." That is not the language of a side preparing to capitulate. That is the language of a side that has decided the only currency that matters now is the willingness to absorb catastrophic pain and to inflict it back. And now look at the fracture, because the most dangerous crack in this entire operation is not in Tehran, it is in Washington. On Monday of this week, Trump stood at his Doral resort in Miami and told reporters, quote, "We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough." He said the military is achieving major strides toward completing our military objective, and some people could say they're pretty well complete. He said the war would end soon, not this week, but soon. On that same Monday, the Pentagon's own social media account posted a picture of a launched missile with the words "No Mercy" superimposed over it. The caption read, "We have only just begun to fight. Same day, same government. Diametrically opposite messages." This is not a communications failure. This is a strategic incoherence at the command level of the world's most powerful military. And it matters enormously because Iran is watching it. Russia is watching it. China is watching it. Every adversary and every ally is asking the same question. Who is actually running this war? The president who says it is almost over, or the Pentagon that says the hardest fighting is still ahead? There is more fracture to examine. Public polling conducted by NBC News in the early days of Operation Epic Fury shows that 54% of registered American voters disapprove of Trump's handling of Iran. 41% approve. In a midterm election year, those numbers are politically lethal, and Trump knows it, which is precisely why his public statements have oscillated wildly between "we've practically won" and "we might need ground troops." He is managing a domestic political timeline that is completely out of alignment with the military operational timeline. And then there is the Republican Party itself. Trump's own allies on Capitol Hill are expressing private alarm about a ground incursion. There is no authorization for use of military force covering a ground invasion of Iran. There is no legal framework. There is no congressional buy-in. If American soldiers are ordered onto Iranian soil and casualties mount, Trump owns that entirely, politically, legally, and historically. Iran is trapped between a broken military it cannot quickly rebuild and an ideology it cannot abandon. But America is also trapped between a war aim that requires ground troops to achieve and a political environment that makes ordering those ground troops catastrophically risky. Now look at the economic dimension, because what is happening to the Strait of Hormuz right now is not a footnote to this war. It is the war's most powerful weapon, and Iran is wielding it with precision. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its navigable channel. Every single day before this war, approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply passed through that channel. 20%. Saudi oil, Iraqi oil, Kuwaiti oil, UAE oil. 20% of what powers the global economy transited through a waterway that Iran physically borders on its northern shore. Iran has effectively closed it, not with mines, not with a formal naval blockade that would invite immediate military countermeasures. Iran achieved the closure through something smarter, the credible threat of anti-ship missiles and drone attacks on any commercial vessel that attempts to transit. Insurance companies have pulled coverage. Shipping lines have rerouted or anchored. The effect is identical to a physical blockade without triggering the legal and military tripwires that a physical blockade would set off. Reuters reported that global oil and gas shipping costs surged to all-time highs on March 2nd. CNBC reported Wall Street strategists warning that oil could hit $100 a barrel and potentially $200 if the closure holds for a prolonged period. Iran's own foreign minister called it Operation Epic Mistake and said, quote, "Oil prices have doubled while all commodities are skyrocketing. When oil crosses $100 a barrel, that is not a number on a chart. That is your gas prices. That is your heating bill next winter. That is the cost of every product that moves in a shipping container: food, medicine, electronics, clothing. That is inflation reignited at a moment when the American economy was just beginning to stabilize." And this is where the strategic trap closes on Washington. The longer this war continues without a decisive political resolution, the more the strait stays closed. The more the strait stays closed, the more the economic pressure builds domestically on Trump to end the war. But the only way Trump can end the war on his stated terms, unconditional surrender, regime change, uranium secured, is to escalate, possibly to the ground. And that escalation is the one move that could extend this war indefinitely. The IEA has begun releasing emergency strategic oil stockpiles. It is a tourniquet, not a cure. But here is what is not being covered. Here is the real story underneath the one everyone is watching. And I want you to pay close attention to this part, because it changes the entire strategic calculus of this war. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the man appointed on March 8th to replace his father Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury, was himself wounded in the very same airstrike that killed his father. This is not rumor. This was confirmed to The Guardian by Iran's own ambassador to Cyprus. The New York Times published it within the last 24 hours, citing both Iranian and Israeli officials. Mojtaba Khamenei, the man now theoretically in command of the Islamic Republic, was hurt in the first hours of this war. And here is the critical question no one is asking loudly enough. If he is wounded, who is actually making decisions inside Tehran right now? The answer, confirmed by Reuters reporting published yesterday, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC did not wait for a traditional clerical succession process. There was no assembly of experts deliberation in the conventional sense. The IRGC elevated Mojtaba Khamenei because they needed a name, a symbol, a figure of continuity. But the operational control, the strategic direction, the decision-making authority inside Iran's war machine that sits with IRGC commanders who are hardliners, who have spent 40 years preparing for exactly this moment, and who have absolutely no interest in a negotiated settlement that ends their institutional power. Kamal Karazi, the foreign policy advisor to the Supreme Leader's office, told CNN on March 10th, "I don't see any room for diplomacy anymore." Now understand what the IRGC being in effective control of Iran means for Trump's ground troop calculus. Trump's entire post-war vision, the Venezuela model, the compliant successor government, the oil cooperation deal, requires a functional, pliable political leadership in Tehran that the IRGC will work with. But the IRGC is not a pliable institution. It is the single most powerful military, economic, political entity in Iran. It runs oil companies. It runs construction conglomerates. It runs intelligence operations. It answers to no elected body and very few clerical ones. You cannot bomb the IRGC out of power. You cannot negotiate it into irrelevance from the air. If Trump wants the outcome he has described, the Venezuela outcome, he needs someone on the ground inside Iran to physically dismantle IRGC control of the state apparatus, secure the nuclear material in those underground bunkers, and stand up a successor government that can actually function, and that someone cannot arrive by drone. There is one more thing they are not telling you. While Iran publicly declares the Strait of Hormuz closed to all tanker traffic, CNBC reported as recently as this morning that Iran is simultaneously shipping millions of barrels of its own oil to China through that same strait. The closure is selective. Iran is choking global oil markets while keeping its own revenue stream to Beijing alive, collecting the economic weapons dividend while preserving its most important strategic relationship. That is not desperation. That is sophisticated economic warfare being prosecuted by a regime that is not behaving like a country on the verge of unconditional surrender. There is no off ramp visible right now, not because no one is looking for one, because the conditions that would make an off ramp possible have been systematically destroyed by both sides. Iran cannot surrender, not because it still has a military capable of winning this war. It does not. Its navy is gone. Its air force is gone. Its missile capability has been degraded by 80%. It cannot surrender because the entity that now controls Iran, the IRGC, would cease to exist the moment a compliant successor government opens the doors to American strategic interests. Surrender is not an option for them. It is institutional death. America cannot stop short, not because Trump wants to keep fighting. The polls suggest he needs this war over quickly. America cannot stop short because if it does, if it accepts a negotiated end that leaves Iran's uranium unaccounted for, the IRGC intact, and a hardline supreme leader in power, then the entire military campaign will have achieved exactly what Operation Midnight Hammer achieved in June of 2025, a 2-year setback, after which Iran reconstitutes, rebuilds, and resumes. Trump said it himself. He does not want another 2-year setback. He wants a permanent solution. And the only permanent solution to an adversary that will not surrender from the air is the one no one in Washington wants to say out loud. Will American boots touch Iranian soil? The world is not just waiting for the answer. The oil markets are waiting. The global economy is waiting. The 750 million people who depend on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz are waiting. Every ally in the Gulf, every adversary in Moscow and Beijing, every general in the Pentagon, and every soldier currently positioned in the region is waiting. And the answer, when it comes, will not arrive quietly. That is where we are today. I will be back the moment something breaks. Share this if it gave you value. This story deserves far more attention than it is getting. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next one.